Today, I am going to give a talk on listening, contemplating, and meditating. And I'm getting you might say, the body of this from a short talk that Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche gave on the same topic. Now, we had Lama Karma here last weekend, and one thing that he stressed, and I think this is very good, and that is to begin a teaching or even a practice or a meditation session with the feeling of bodhicitta, the aspiration that may this be able to benefit all beings in some way or another. And then the other aspect of bodhicitta is, of course, that ultimately our essence is beyond the temporary ups and downs of our mind, our emotional upheavals, our feelings, and so forth. I'm going to also say this because it just seems to be on my mind because of what things have happened lately. And that is, you never know how your contact with another person may affect them. I recently told this story. It's a very obvious result of contact, but many years ago, I was friends with a man. He played volleyball. I used to be in a group that played volleyball a long, long time ago. And as a result of that, I got to know his mother, who lived northeast of Ridgeland, but got to be her friend. And she actually, I think I did some upholstery work for her. This is how far back this goes. And somewhere around 1989, 1990, I was driving around and had a little free time, and I just stopped by to see her unannounced. You know, people used to do that because people weren't so busy as we are today. And when I got to the door and rang the bell, I heard, "Help!" So I went in and found her trapped in a closet. It was a new house, but there was a trap door to the attic to get into the attic, and it was in the ceiling right in front of the closet that she was in. And when she, for some reason or other, she closed the closet door, and the trap door fell down, blocking the closet. Well, let's just say she was glad to see me. Now, you can't expect those kind of dramatic results when you just show up, but sometimes having contact with a person can make a huge difference in their life, just listening to them. And then another was somebody called me by mistake. I think nowadays it's called a butt dial. We all do that. So I called back to see, what the call was about. And well, of course, it was a butt dial, but in the meanwhile, while I was talking to that person, I found out that another person's partner has terminal bone cancer. Terminal to the point that the choices were, do we take really aggressive action and go through lots of pain, fatigue, mental anguish, and so forth, or do we just take a mild treatment and more hospice care? And that's a heck of a choice to have to make. But this was just coming up. So again, there was something about that call that was important. When the call was over, all three of us agreed that it was an important call that I called back about. So keep that in mind. So to get back to this topic here, of course, there is a path in Buddhism, and it is through listening and hearing. and actually listening. I'm going to go into that in a minute, exactly what it is, but it also includes hearing. Contemplating and meditation is how we travel the path. It's really that simple. This is how we travel the path. It can't be any other way. It would be nice if it was, but basically we were all around at the time of the Buddha, and if he could have, shall we say, enlightened us or liberated us, he would have done that. And there have been plenty other very highly realized teachers since then, and if they could have done it, they would have done it then too. So it's important that there is a path, and it is our responsibility to travel the path. And the goal of the path is, of course, complete Buddhahood. Also, there is the idea of a bodhisattva involved here, whereas that you become very highly realized, but your compassion and love for sentient beings is such that you keep coming back into the world to help guide others out. There is the Tanka, the wheel of life, which I've talked about in other talks. And the wheel of life has the 6 realms pictured. They're like slices of a pie. And in each of the 6 realms in the wheel of life, there's always a bodhisattva pictured, which means that in all of the realms, the hell realm, the hungry ghost realm, the animal realm, the human realm, the jealous God realm, and the God realm, there are bodhisattvas there that are working towards the enlightenment and liberation of beings in those realms. Another point is there's a difference between ordinary beings and enlightened beings. And if, to make it very simple, ordinary beings have Buddha nature. There are lots of different terms for it. Another is primordial wisdom. The Tibetan is Yeshe. Jnana, Jnana, is the Sanskrit word. Just like a fully enlightened being, but the difference is that as ordinary beings, our minds are clouded with all kinds of confusing emotions, habitual patterns. Basically, it's ignorance, the ignorance being that we think that there is a self and that there is an other, or a not me. And an enlightened being, there is no self in terms of being separate from other beings. Again, we have to exert effort, and we have to have the intention to travel the path. Without that, it will not happen by accident or by itself. It's not like you have a seed of a flower, you throw it in the ground, maybe it'll sprout, maybe it won't. But if you throw enough on the ground, something's going to sprout. But it's not like that. If our Buddha nature would have sprouted that way, it would have sprouted a long time ago, aeons ago. So we really have to concentrate on doing what is necessary to travel the path, to develop our wisdom, and so forth. It's essential that we actually, hear the teachings by listening and various other means nowadays that are available to us, and then to contemplate them, to chew on them, and then finally to apply them in our lives. In Tibetan Buddhism, there are the 3 paths. There's the foundation path, then there is the Mahayana path, And then there is the Vajrayana path. And all three of them, the practices are slightly different, or they are applied slightly different. Foundation practice is one of primarily taming our mind so that, like a dog, it behaves. And once our mind starts behaving, then we can apply training, a mind training, which is the Mahayana path. And then with the Vajrayana, we have deity practice where we actually visualize ourselves an enlightened being. It is said that the Vajrayana, the goal is the path, that we visualize and imagine ourselves as already being enlightened. Here is what listening means. And it is traditionally done in person with a qualified teacher. The Kagyus are called the oral lineage, where the teachings are transmitted orally from a teacher to student. Bill Hatton asked me this question. He was asking me when I saw him recently, they're not doing that anymore, are they? Or what's going on here? So I said, well, Lama Karma is coming. I'll bring him, and you can ask him that question. I figured, why not go to the source here? And Lama Karma said, well, yes, traditionally they do it that way, but now we have books, we have Zoom, we have YouTube, we have Facebook Live, and all kinds of other things that can be done to transfer information from a teacher to a student. And these are all considered valuable and valid. But on the other hand, it's important to realize you don't have to hear everything. You don't have to read every book. It's better to, you might say, study, which comes into the contemplation aspect of it, a few books and keep going back and studying them again. I remember this, I think, came from existentialism after the Second World War. I can't remember who wrote the book, French existentialist. But there was a character in the book that kind of exhibits this problem, that he decided that he would go to the library, the local village library, and he would read every book in the library. And he had a system. He started with the A's, and he figured by the time he got through the Z's, he would know it all. So don't do this. You'll just get confused. What we do need to do is to be open to the teachings. I remember in our book study class, one time we studied cutting through spiritual materialism, and Trungpa Rinpoche kept going over and over and over, open up, open up. I was in Eau Claire a number of years ago by the University of Wisconsin, and I saw a bumper sticker, probably on a teacher's car, and it said, "The mind is like a parachute. It only works when it's open." Again, we have to be open to the teaching rather than looking at, well, how does this fit in with what I already know? How does this, you might say, back up my already existing habitual patterns? And just accept what you might say, just feeds your own ego. This is what is called spiritual materialism. So we have to open up. Rinpoche made the comparison going to a doctor and taking medicine. If you trust the doctor and then he prescribes medicine, you take it. You don't Google the medicine and read for days about the medicine, how it was developed and chemical composition and yada, yada, yada. You take the medicine and trust the doctor. Again, you don't have to know a whole lot about the medicine for it to be effective and to treat what is causing your problem. Now, this does not mean blind faith. The Buddha never talked about blind faith. Karmapa has said that blind faith is a problem. Keep that in mind. It's not about blind faith, that we need to be open and we need to be diligent to actually absorb the teachings, absorbing the teachings. And this is what is meant by listening. And again, this is a good little phrase. If you listen, you might hear something. If you don't listen, you're not going to hear anything. It's really that simple. The next is contemplation. And this means just thinking over what you have heard, pondering it, considering it, if it's true, if it's valuable, if it's valid. Can you use it? You could even say chew on it. This is very personal, but it is essential that you want to keep these teachings fresh in your memory. And it doesn't mean you have to remember everything you received in a book or a teaching, but at least parts that seem important to you. Perhaps this is something that I have found, and that is that if something does not seem, either you don't understand it or it just seems to contradict what you feel, instead of rejecting it, just put it in the category of, I need to investigate this more, maybe ask the teacher more questions about this, rather than saying, nah, can't be, impossible. This goes back to, again, I haven't used the word yet, curiosity. Be curious about what you are hearing, and then keep coming back on this and contemplating it. Keep it fresh in your memory rather than write it down on a pad of paper and then put it in the filing cabinet. And then 10 years later, you look in that file and, oh, because by that time it's pretty stale and you really not benefited from it. A good phrase that I like is take it into your experience. Chew on it, look at it from different angles, and then if something makes sense to you, take it into your experience. Again, it isn't just another thing that you know, but you don't do anything about. Also, it's good to think about the lineage. We did the lineage supplication before we did White Tara. And in fact, White Tara began with the White Tara lineage supplication too. The lineage is important. This is where the source of the teachings come from. And if you look at the biographies of these great teachers who did put the teachings to practice and attained the goal, that this can help give us inspiration. Well, they did it, and this is what they passed on to their students. So these lineage supplications are very important for giving us inspiration again, investigate the teachings that they taught and to think about them and, when possible, to apply them in our lives. It's good to ask questions when there's a question and answer session, but also of your teachers in private, to have interviews and ask questions about things that you don't understand. This is where it really does become an oral situation where you're getting direct instructions from a teacher in a one-on-one situation. So when you have tested and questioned the teachings in your own mind and really thought about them, their validity, and so forth, you will develop confidence that you need to put them into practice. It's a slow process. It isn't going to be, oh, I got it. I know sometimes I have met people that had really didn't know much about Buddhism, and it wasn't in a situation, a Buddhist situation. It was maybe I was over at a friend's house, and this person happened to be a friend of the friend. Well, tell me about Buddhism. And I tell them a few things. Oh, I got it. And then they would not talk about it anymore after that. Yeah, I didn't tell them, no, you didn't get it, but I knew that they didn't get it. And if you get it that quickly, probably you need to chew on it a little bit more. So what it's about is understanding. It's about developing confidence in the lineage, the teachings, and the teacher. And you develop a type of certainty that cuts through doubts. This is how contemplation works. Thinking about specific teachings, focusing on individual parts, analyzing it, turning it over in your mind over and over again. Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche mentions monastic debate in this area. I don't know if any of you have seen monastic debate, but what you have is a monk, or it could be a nun. It's done in monasteries and nunneries. That's why I say a monk or a nun. And they would be seated. Then you would have a questioner who would be standing. Right away, this is kind of a power position. You're sitting down, being questioned by a person that's standing in front of you. And they usually have a mala on their arm like this. And their job is to question you and to trip you up about the Dharma. And so then they will ask a question and go like that. And that indicates, okay, give me an answer. Then the monk that's sitting down or the person that's sitting down will give an answer. And then the man that's standing or the woman that's standing will then ask a follow-up question. And again, it's going to be a little complicated follow-up question because their job is to kind of trip you up, to make sure that you know exactly what you're talking about. I've seen this in person, and it's very interesting. The point is that if you can defend yourself in a situation like that, you really know the Dharma, you really know the teachings, and it's done to develop your skills in understanding and being able to express the teachings. Now, I won't do that to any of you, so don't worry. But Rinpoche said that a question and answer session can work in the same way, that this gets you engaged in the process, gets you to think about things. Rinpoche did something that was very unusual in Tibet when he came to this country and good teachings. He would give a teaching in the morning, and then the afternoon frequently was just open to question and answers. And usually the afternoon session was completely full of questions and answers. And my experience was that this is when Rinpoche really shined, because he was speaking spontaneously rather than from when he's describing a classic text. So to finish up this section, contemplation is important to be done alone, but it can be augmented by question and answer sessions. And by all means, it's good to have regular interviews with a teacher. Now, the third part is meditating. And Rinpoche says this is where we put what we have heard and contemplated into actual practice. If we just listen and contemplate, it again will not really benefit us much. He uses the comparison of a cook teaching, like at a restaurant, which reminds me that south of KTD on the other side of the Hudson River, there is a school called CIA, Culinary Institute of America. Just one of these little factoids. So anyway, the idea is that you could attend a class there from a very good cook, learn how to cook. But what's the benefit if you don't ever cook a meal? So that's the point, that if we can put into practice through meditation, and there's more than sitting meditation. We start with sitting meditation. There's all kinds of different practices that we can do that are included in meditation. Here's a quote from Khenpo Rinpoche: "To experience and enjoy the understanding, wisdom, and compassion that can grow within ourselves, we need to practice meditation." I feel like putting that on my Facebook page today. He stresses meditation, and then he talks about mistaken views and the antidote to these mistaken views, or why the mistaken views are incorrect. The first is meditation is only for beginners, and that once you become more advanced, you can just put that aside. Kind of like you're in the 6th grade and now you're going to be in junior high. And so a lot of that stuff you don't need. Or you get a degree from college and now you're off in the world, and most of what you learned you don't need. You never abandon your meditation practice. You're never too advanced. And what comes to my mind is at a point in Milarepa's life, he said, "I cannot meditate." Now that seems to contradict Rinpoche here. But what he meant was that he had reached the point where he cannot not meditate, that there was no distinction between meditation and not meditation, that he was always meditating. He always had the mindfulness, the concentration, the one-pointedness, and didn't get distracted. So yes, you never get too advanced to not meditate. So the second misconception is, well, meditate means to go to an isolated place, a cave, to do austerities, and, giving up your home, your family, your possessions, your wealth, and so forth. And in some of the teachings, they talk about this. But you don't have to do that. If you do want to go to a cave, I will tell you this, that in the building off of the deck next to the house, there's a cistern. And I have a little trap door. There are two chambers and a little ladder. If you want to go down there, it would make a very good cave. I will get food to you once a week or so, and then you can meditate all you want. And I'm saying this kind of with a grin on my face. The point is that you don't have to be a Milarepa. So what is important is to have an approach that is recommended by your teacher, that is integrated into your practice and your normal daily lives. And slow and gradually, then our diligence, our devotion, and our wisdom will develop, because change will happen. That if we are doing it properly, if we have done the listening and hearing, the contemplation, and now we are meditating regularly, things will happen. And and this will naturally lead to lessening to our attachment to worldly concerns and our material possessions. I told this story, I think it was at Stillwater, Sunday afternoon when Rinpoche was there, because he was talking about meditation. Now, this was when I was a prison chaplain, and there was one man, he really took to Buddhism and meditation. I was giving a class every week, and we did prayers also every week through different programs. And he would be meditating back in his room when there wasn't a program. So he developed a regular meditation practice. Eventually, when he came down to one of the practices, he told me this. He said, you know, there's a lot of suffering in this place. And it's not just the inmates, it's the guards. The point being that his mind had calmed down to the point where he was being more aware of other people than he had been. And he was seeing things more clearly. Again, it's a gradual process. But as we meditate and our minds slow down a little bit, we start seeing a little more clearly, and things happen. You don't need to have formal renunciation. You just naturally find yourself less interested in some of the worldly affairs that you used to be interested in. Rinpoche says it's an unburdening process. And here's another observation that I have made. I have had personal contact with a number of friends that I've known for 40 years and more. They're not Buddhist, but something that struck me was how frequently they talked about other people, and not necessarily very good things about other people. Again, is something that can happen as you meditate more, is that you're not so likely to be talking negatively about other people, about gossip and so forth. Now, about happiness, because Rinpoche talks about how our happiness can increase. So here is my personal story. And that was when I moved out here. I had never lived in the country before. And I was married, and my wife wanted a horse. So we got a horse. And then I kind of got interested in horses, got more horses, joined a saddle club, went on trail rides. We'd go down to the neighbors in the evening in the summertime when it was still light, because he liked horses too. He was in the saddle club. We did all kinds of things with horses. It was a lot of fun doing these things with horses. I even had a team of horses and I did some farm work with them. Well, eventually I realized that, well, horses need food and you pasture them in the summertime, but then in the wintertime, you have to feed them hay. So I started making hay, and of course, I needed equipment to make hay. And then, of course, there is horse manure, and that has to be cleaned up. And so I got a horse manure spreader, and that had to be filled up, and on and on and on. And eventually, I realized this is a lot of work. And I sold the horses. Then, if I wanted to have some pleasant times, I could just go for a walk in the woods. So the point is that there is simplicity that can come with just letting go, developing our inner happiness rather than relying on outer happiness. So we need to make, you might say, inner development. There's another story that I believe Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche told this story, and that was when he was at Trangu Monastery in Tibet. There was an old monk that came to Trangu Rinpoche, and he gave him almost all of his possessions. The old monk said, I don't need these anymore. I need to renounce these material possessions. And Trangu Rinpoche told his attendant, put these away in a room. Do not disperse them. Do not give them away. And later, the monk came back and said, you know, there is one thing I wish I wouldn't have given you because I really do need it. And so Trangu Rinpoche gave his attendant instructions to give it back to the monk. And after a certain period of time, the monk had all his possessions back because he realized he really couldn't do without these possessions. Another misconception is that meditation will cause mental problems. And Rinpoche, his answer is, well, if you try it without a teacher or try to base it on what you've learned through books, and this talk was given a while ago, now all you have to do is go to YouTube. I think I even have on my smartwatch, and it even has a mindful app on the smartwatch. Rinpoche says that if you do it without having the direct input from a teacher, all kinds of complications can arise that a book won't correct you. If you depend on an authentic teacher and practice the teacher's instructions, you won't have difficulties. So you need to talk to a person in person, a teacher in person about your practice, whether it be deity practice, mind training, nundro, meditation. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. And actually, it's an indication that your mind isn't as open as it could be if you're resisting talking to somebody in person about this. Rinpoche uses the metaphor of going to a foreign country and using a guidebook versus a guide. My personal experience is that in so many countries, English is familiar enough with enough people that you can get by with a lot of things. But let's say you don't speak English. You get to a lot of countries and you're in big trouble if you don't have a guide that does speak English. If you have a guide You can avoid a lot of pitfalls. You can avoid getting lost, wandering around, thinking that you know where you're going and you don't really have a clue where you're going. Rinpoche says that we can get to a marvelous land, but without guidance, not much happens. So connecting with a teacher, an experienced teacher, is very important. Now, this kind of goes over what I already talked about, but Rinpoche mentions it specifically that meditation practices are in conflict with our worldly activities or our worldly success. Actually, they can help because through meditation, we can learn how to relax and experience peace of mind. And he says, from that comes a joyful mind. And then when difficulties happen in your mundane life, you can work with them without aggression, without frustration. You can keep focused on what is important, and you can maintain a positive state of mind. Now, maybe none of you ever run into difficulties that cause you frustration. This is my latest. I cannot get my printer to work properly. If any of you want to come over and help me get my printer working properly, you're welcome to it. Be that as it may. I think today that one of the biggest difficulties we have has to do with IT and the various digital devices that we depend on. Again, a memory comes to mind of when I was working as a prison chaplain. My supervisor came into my room saying, "What were you doing on the phone for 35 minutes?" Kind of with that tone of voice, like, I'm goofing off. And I said, I was talking to IT in Madison, which is the capital of the state. Oh, never mind. When we have at least a little bit of peace of mind, some peaceful qualities, others will having you around more than if you are agitated, jumping around, gossiping. I say jumping around mentally. So you're doing others a favor as well when you practice and your mind calms down and settles down. Rinpoche says that, quote, by developing peace of mind and a kind heart through practice, you will be well loved by everyone, which is to be very successful. So to finish this up here, when you practice kindness and compassion, happiness will not only be for you, but it'll be for those around you. You'll become more willing to listen to others' problems. You'll be more likely to help them, having listened to their problems. Again, you'll have mental peace and tranquility, which will make things more easy for you in your life. And then another point that he makes is that an error is to think that you're going to get results overnight. You probably all know that already. This takes time, it takes diligence, it takes motivation to keep going. I like to use the example of the hare and the tortoise, this Greek myth about can't remember if it was an actual race, but anyway, you had the hare that was very fast. Rabbits can run very fast. And then you have the tortoise who just kind of creeps along. And of course, the hare would race ahead and then feeling that he was way ahead, take his time and get distracted and do different things. And the tortoise just kept on. And of course, the tortoise won the race. So if you take that approach of, well, I'm going to practice this weekend, I'm going to really concentrate on doing my practice and yada, 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 yada. And then 3 months go before you do it again. You're not going to really accomplish much. But if you practice a little bit every day, that is how you obtain results. There is a Zen saying, which is hasten slowly. So you want to have this feeling of this is important, but it is not the sort of thing where you're running a race and trying to do it as quickly as possible. So anyway, just keep practicing, and there is no doubt that you will progress. So to kind of sum this up, that it's important to remember that we have this profound potential for these qualities ripening within ourselves, and that the Buddhist approach is to work on developing these. And so through listening and hearing and other modern methods, reading, internet, IT, and so forth, then contemplating them, chewing on them, really getting to understand them, and then practicing, we will receive the results, the benefits.